Hey guys, welcome to week 4 reflection. Before I dived into what I've been and produced throughout the week, I basically wanted to discuss the idea of these video logs as a whole and how I think they've helped me progress. Doing this for the 4th week now, I feel like I've become more confident in how I'm able to talk to the camera and how I'm able to talk to you as an audience. Obviously, gaining reflection from these as well as from my peers and Dave himself, I can understand how it's helped me progress a little bit further in showing off my work and being able to directly discuss how I've pushed myself forward throughout the weeks, or my reflection to any theory work that we've gone into. Basically, I understand that I'm still umming throughout these. Obviously, I do find it difficult in producing these. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but I feel like I'm working there and it's getting a bit easier as each one goes on. Obviously, working without a script and just going by notes, it's helping me to achieve an organic flow, and it's being able to think of ideas on the spot and discuss my personal beliefs on how I've worked and how my work has developed across the series of this project itself. Actually, if anything, overall, I just know I want to continue this. And I want to be able to push these further, and I want to be able to look at how I can incorporate these within my evaluations as well as within projects down the line, especially within the FMP itself. Back to this week though, the main thing I did this week was re-choose my frames. After reflecting over my 6 original frames that I chose and re-watching the film, I evaluated the shots I could use, or I was using, weren't as invigorating as they could have been, highlighting how I could have basically incorporated the idea of introducing my own primary source. My shots previously were from a secondary source, which was Film Grab, and rewatching the film, I basically took timestamps of each moment in the film which I thought was effective or creative in the way that Stanley Kubrick directed the film itself. And whilst the original ones for Film Grab were cinematically stunning, they didn't tell the narrative as clearly as I'd hoped. And the new ones I've selected, the new 6 frames, tell the narrative a lot easier, and they really emphasise the idea of conflict between the characters. And it's something I want to incorporate, is this idea of character emotion and character development throughout the film, and understanding how this conflict is happening between the characters allows me to explain this to the audience a little bit easier as well. And obviously within the brief, one of the main points was to create a constant communication within the audience, and this is something I feel like my new 6 frames highlights a lot better, as it's more character based in how the characters react with one another, as well as I believe the new shots are more visually stunning and understand how to use composition a lot better compared to the previous 6 frames I used. This week's influence was the first chance I had to look at my own ideas of artists. Obviously, bouncing off the head of Edward Hopper, I wanted to research an artist which worked around my ideas of context, understanding how I could explore processes that I enjoyed, and that is Matthias Brown, also known as Trace Loops on his Tumblr account. He basically uses animation to explore surrealism, and he does this through an organic strength of line, which is created analog, in an analog process. Basically, his continuous flow of line ends up creating these looping narratives, like a never-ending or eternal sense, as the animations he creates are heavily based on character or motions, especially hand motions and interacting with the face are one of his key projects which he has explored in the past. I think this works especially well in the context of the film 2001: Space Odyssey itself, as depending how you interpret the film, obviously the film itself is depicted as a non-linear narrative, and it's the idea of the ending of the film loops back around to the beginning of the film, and it really emphasises once again, just putting into words, that the idea of Matthias Brown's work and this whole idea of trace loops helps convey the sense of never ending, or this idea of like eternal motion. Based on his work, I wanted to create my own looping animation, and I ended up doing this through rotoscope. Obviously, rotoscope is the digital animation, or a digital form of animation which you paint over and animate amongst the original frames. I ended up creating a piece based off of the second frame of my new 6 frames that I had chosen. It was one of my originals actually, but it's the motion of the character Dave, where he's presenting something towards Hal, as the perspective of the shot is from Hal's, and taking this directly from the actual original source. What I like about it is the fact that the lens is depicted through a fisheye lens, as it's almost 3D and like 3-dimensional, as Hal, when he pushes the piece towards the frame and the actual camera itself, that it enlarges and it creates a sense of depth, which I think is really intriguing and works really well. Obviously the final animation itself, being looped, was around 50-ish frames, I would say, and that's obviously it looping back and forth, as it I wanted to make sure I got that organic flow of character. And one of the prominent things which I think worked within this specific piece was the idea that he's presenting something to an audience. Obviously within the film itself, the context of it is he's presenting it to Hal, a character, but as we are the Hal in that perspective, as we are looking upon Dave, that he's almost presenting it to us. And it's that idea of interactivity and that, once again, communication between Dave and us as an audience, which brings that interplay of communication, which I think works really well. I wanted to push this idea even further within my work, the idea of animation and rotoscope, and I developed this by basically doing animation once again for my first frame, and that is the Monkey Club scene, where the monkey himself, within the prologue of the actual film, swings and hits onto a club and onto the bone of an animal. This one, I incorporated the idea of brushes. Basically, I looked at the brushes that Matthias Brown uses within his work, and I wanted to highlight how I could incorporate that within mine. And I found someone who replicated the original brushes and designs of Matthias's work digitally, so I incorporated those, and basically it gave this nice, this brushed organic stroke texture to the final piece and like to the final frames, to try and give it that analog aesthetic, which I tried to incorporate based upon his work. One thing I also ended up doing was digitally compositing the original background of the actual frame itself from the film. I wanted to try and achieve that sense of realism, understanding how the difference between analog and digital process could be combined essentially. And I feel like it worked really well, as it gave a nice contrast between the use of colour and the thick stroke of line between the actual animation. It's one of my, I feel like it's a strong start to the finalised frames which I want to be producing, and it's something that I hope to be able to use further. I know that obviously starting with animation, I want to be able to produce a couple of frames which are just analog skill based, but looking at the idea of animation as a whole, I think I want to continue it and push it even further within my work. Overall though, I'm definitely happy with the developments I made, and I'm excited to have worked around the idea of Matthias Brown's animations, and I'm sure they'll definitely influence me within the future. If anything, I was happy that I was able to explore the idea of strength of line. Having worked analog and digital within line work now, it's allowed me to basically explore how thicker pens and like even different styles of pens, like going from biros to sharpies to border markers, can all produce a different sense of line and how it can impact the actual final frame itself. Going forward, I think achieving a finer detail, even looking at continuous line, could be effective in how I convey the narrative of the actual film, and it's something which I think going forward, I think I will base my work on this idea of character, through line, and identifying the scene as a whole, and then breaking down the scene through either block color or animation or even layering.